Carly, shall I start or you want to wait a couple more minutes?
Yeah, I think we're good to go. I think we've got a critical mass here.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I've been really excited about this panel for the last few weeks. My name is Rachael Hageman Blair, and I am an associate professor here at the University of Buffalo in the Department of Biostatistics. But I'm also I'm a co-director of the Institute for Artificial Intelligence and Data Science, and I oversee the educational initiatives in the Institute. So today, we're going to talk about, I think, a very near and dear topic to all of us. And I'm coming here today as not only a faculty member, a teacher, but also a program director, but also as a parent with two young kids in the schools. And so I really think about this stuff very actively. The title of today's panel discussion is Ethics in AI Education, K through 12 and Higher Education. So I really like to thank you for joining, and I'm going to give you a little bit of an outline of what this panel is going to kind of look like. Um, the first thing I'm going to do is introduce our panelists very, very briefly. I am not an expert in AI, and I'm not an expert in K through 12 education. So I'm really excited to have people joining us today that are really in the trenches of things, and I think they're going to provide really insightful complementary expertise as we kind of begin to navigate this. So I'll do that. Then I'm going to talk for maybe 10 minutes about just some current trends, some general thinking and advisement that's kind of down from the Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education, and also from some current literature. And then we'll get to our panelist discussion. I have three prepared questions that kind of cut between themes that we'll discuss. And throughout the presentation, there will be some surveys coming your way, just to get an idea of, who you are, what you're thinking about. I really encourage you to use the chat. I'm really lucky to have Carly here to navigate the chat. Use the chat to ask questions. There will be questions at the end. But if you're thinking something and you don't want to wait until the end, just put it down and we'll put it in a list. We may not get to all the questions, but please feel free to also use the chat to share your thoughts and discuss issues that are going on in your, venue. So the first thing I'm going to do is release the first survey. And this is just to wonder, where are you coming from? There are a lot of stakeholders in terms of AI education. I just want to kind of get my finger on the pulse of who's here. And teacher, administrator, student support, parent, concerned citizen, all of the above is okay too. So just please select all that apply. Great, great. All right, and I will be totally upfront. I'm new with polls, as I was telling Carly, so she's really helping me navigate this. Looks like we have a good distribution, a lot of teachers, administrators, and probably a lot of people that wear all of these hats. So again, welcome, and hopefully this is meaningful to you. So let's begin with our panelists. So they should be spotlighted. And I'm really excited to invite to have Greg Conley here. He is an instructional technology coach from Buffalo Public Schools. It's a really interesting perspective, and I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say. Rachael Kent wears a lot of hats. She is also from the Buffalo Public Schools, but she also has a lot of, I think, side projects and hobbies related to AI and curriculum development and engineering. And we have Loretta Frankovitch, who is a colleague at UB here. She's the Assistant Director of the Office of Academic Integrity. And she's going to provide that, additional perspective and some thoughts on, how we transition students from high school to college with all of these AI issues that are surrounding us. So there should have been some reading that kind of came along with this, I hope. If you're not able to find it, I can connect you with it. It's on the website, or maybe Carly can put it in the chat or attach these things. So when I was trying to come along with some guidelines, what's happening, get my finger on the pulse, I realize it's really hard to do because things are always changing. But in May 2023, which is not terribly long ago, there was a report that came out from the US Office of Education Technology, really kind of insights and recommendations. And it was derived from a number of discussions with focus groups and so forth of educators. And one thing that kind of resonated to me at a high level is the urgency to address AI like right now. Because as always, these things are always changing. Seems like the new thing is coming out and we're already kind of a step behind. But they gave these kind of broad reasons. In particular, AI can enable achievement of educational priorities in effective ways, right? And lower costs. There's good support for teachers. It allows teachers to better support their students' individualized needs. And we really kind of saw this, at least I saw it, especially in the COVID era is when I really started to begin to understand and appreciate the good that AI can do. The second reason to kind of address AI now is that there's a general awareness of system level risks and anxiety about potential future risks. Now, there's surveillance that's inherently built into these systems and with good intention, but it's surveillance nonetheless. Teachers are concerned about insecurity of their jobs, and one thing that the Department of Education really, I think, emphasized through the entire report, which is over 100 pages, is that teachers are irreplaceable, right? So they're needed now more than ever. And also issues related to discrimination and algorithmic bias, which we'll kind of get into today in our discussion. And finally, the third thing is to prevent unintended and unexpected consequences. So one such example, I think, because when I read this, I'm like, that seems a little technical and has a little bit of jargon. For example, AI adapts by speeding a pace of a curriculum for some students and slowing the pace for the others. So it is this kind of individualized, right? Move at your own speed. But some view this as based on incomplete data, poor theories, and biased assumption about learning. And whereas we want to kind of bring students to an equal, equitable level, we could actually be doing some damage there and creating a wider gap than that was there before. So these were the kind of central themes that came out of this report, not all specific, obviously, to ethics, but I think all of them are kind of ethics loaded. One thing before, I have a feeling, and this tends to happen, tends to be a lot of concern and, as it was stated in the report, anxiety about AI and educational use. So I want to, before we kind of go in the not negative, but the critical direction, to just mention some of the benefits of AI in education, which many of us know, but providing instruction in mixed ability classrooms, so integrated classrooms, providing students with real-time, detailed, timely feedback, enhancing the teacher's ability to support students. They no longer have to be all-knowing. They have these additional resources, individualized learning outcomes, and offloading select day-to-day tasks. So whether it be lesson planning or those emails you have to send out, you have kind of like a shell of what you want to do and just kind of accelerate some of those things so you can focus your time in a more beneficial way. Example use cases that are in the schools now, and again, these are always among others because they're changing so fast. Personalized learning systems, automated assessment systems, facial recognition and predictive analyses, social networking and chatbots, gaming environment to understand concepts. So a lot of these things bring equity. So for example, the gaming environment. Maybe there are some schools that can't afford to have these fancy lab experiments and things like that. So having this option allows students to experience some of those things through simulation. Social networking sites and chatbots. These are, of course, really helpful in many ways, but we kind of bring that to the surveillance ideas. Do students feel secure? Do they feel like they're being, do they feel like they're under surveillance, um, using social media and doing those kind of things? So I know some of them are used for good, like to prevent bullying and things like that, but some of the surveillance may be, I would say, questionable in terms of privacy. So lots of things to think about. Now, again, I want to talk for a small amount of time, but these were the 4 recommendations that the US Department of Education gave with respect to this kind of technology as it relates to ethics. And I just want to kind of preface our discussion with these points, and maybe it will lead into more, but maybe it won't. The first thing is to center people. The stakeholders are parents, educators, and students. AI systems, we know they're an everyday convenience. We use them all the time. They should empower us, and in many ways they do for good. But it is very true that people do not understand how much privacy is at stake with the use of these systems. This isn't just for education, right? But that's a little bit even harder to put your finger on. Um, you do shopping, you use MapQuest or Google Maps, that kind of thing. We talk to our Alexa system. So how much privacy is at stake is rather mysterious. Um, the important thing that they say is that you have to retain a human in the loop. When you use this kind of AI technology in the classroom, there has to be a human in the loop to kind of monitor and facilitate that kind of learning. This is a brief quote. There should be clear limits on the availability to collect, use, transfer, and maintain our personal data, including limits on targeted advertising. And I bolded this point. These limits should put the burden on platforms to minimize how much information they collect, rather than burdening Americans with reading the fine print. I think this is really powerful to me because I think, especially as a parent, there's just seems like there's just so much fine print in these educational applications. It's really difficult to navigate, and it also has a little bit of jargon for the kind of the non-technical user. It can be very challenging and intimidating. The second piece that they recommend is the advancement of equality. So we know that there is bias in machine learning algorithms. So machine learning, so I haven't defined AI, but since you're all here, I think you probably all know and have your own definitions. But the algorithms that underlie this have been known for many years to contain bias, and be prone to discrimination. So to advance equality is a really important thing, or kind of preserve equality. Racial equality and unfair bias were a central theme to all of the listening sessions that this report was based on, and this is important. So in terms of the priorities that are being observed, this is really important. There were questions raised about the data being used in the AI systems as they relate to education, and the fact that the data, because the algorithm is training on a data set, the data set is incomplete, right? And it may have biases in it already. That can lead to unintended consequences, and can actually propagate bias, which is what we don't want to do. Training process, I think of it as garbage in, garbage out. I teach a course in machine learning, so I always tell my students your algorithms and your predictions are only as good as the data for which it's based on. And many times we don't understand the data that's being used to drive these systems. We don't have access to the data. We don't know where this is originating from because transparency is not there. Okay, so if a recommendation is made, it's very hard to kind of understand why the AI is moving in that particular direction. What are the reasons for that? So the statement, which I think is sobering, is that algorithmic bias can diminish equity at a very large scale. So it's something that we should be very concerned with. AI brings education technology to an inflection point. We can either increase disparities or shrink them depending on what we do now. The third of the four is to ensure safety, ethics, and effectiveness. So this is something we'll talk about a little bit more in the panel. There is a need for data privacy and security in systems that are used in education. I think that's well understood and respected. But the data has changed. And this is something that they really kind of emphasize in the report. Instead of kind of the conventional student records where you have a roster, you have grades, you have some personal information, there's also information about learning style. So the data relates to what students do as they learn, what teachers do as they teach. This kind of data comes into play and it's being used, right? It's being used for educational purposes, we hope, and we hope that's where it ends. But, it's not clear how it's being used and are students giving consent to that? Are parents consenting to that? These, I think, are some of the gray areas that have to be explored. There is a need for modernized statements on data privacy, security, and governance, and enforce compliance kind of with privacy laws. They also talk about effectiveness. So there is a need to evaluate the AI software in a very rigorous way. There are some standards in place that should kind of apply to AI technologies that would be included. So, and I believe this is a place where at least I live in Orchard Park. I know we're going to hear about Buffalo's perspective. I feel like Orchard Park has done a good job here, right? And so is UB actually. So they're very good at kind of evaluating tools and making sure that they meet some basic level, or I say exceptional level in terms of standards. The last thing I'll mention is the promotion of transparency. Educators need to know how AI models work in a range of general educational use settings. Extracting rationale for AI learning from AI is difficult, often impossible. This is kind of what I was getting to with transparency. There needs to be a way to assess limitations, problems, and risks. AI is an approximation of reality. So the questions that we should be asking ourselves before adoption, do the AI tools capture what is most important, the essence of what you're trying to do in terms of your learning outcomes? How well do the recommendations fit the educational goals? And what are the broader implications at scale in the educational process? So these are the four things that kind of came out of this report. And my last slide here, before I move into things, with respect to the panel, is from a paper. I have the citation here. It's a great paper. It's not super, super new if we think about the evolution of AI, but it cross-cuts a lot of themes. The four things that they discuss in terms of ethical and societal risks relate to privacy, surveillance, which we talked about that hand in hand, bias and discrimination, and autonomy. Okay. So these are the four. We didn't talk necessarily about autonomy directly, but when I tried to design these questions that I'm going to proceed to ask the panelists, I tried to kind of cross-cut themes here and get to something that tackled these four areas according to our panelists' expertise. So before I introduce the panelists, ask them to actually, I'm going to have them introduce themselves very briefly. I'm going to ask Carly to launch the next poll, which is just a question about, in your view, okay, rank the most pressing ethical issues for AI education. Please share any considerations to the chat. Of course, this is recognizing they're all important, but what are the most important? This is terrific. I really feel like there is, again, a big distribution of impressions across the board here, which is really interesting. I should mention I'm on a task force at the university for AI in education, and there I can imagine the scales are quite different, actually, in terms of what faculty are really concerned about. So while this is going, I'm going to turn it over to the panelists for just a brief introduction. I'm going to start with Greg.
Hey everybody, as the title said earlier, I'm an instructional technology coach in the Buffalo schools. So my day consists of working with teachers, usually through the lens of technology. I'm also formerly an E&L teacher. So I tend to work in schools with high populations of English language learners. So a lot of the things that I like to talk about or my work is mostly dedicated toward technology and English language learners and weaving between the two.
Thank you, Greg. I'm just going to go in the order that I see you on my screen here. Loretta, please.
Hi, everyone. So I'm the assistant director here in the Office of Academic Integrity at UB, and I have zero experience using artificial intelligence in the classroom, but as an administrator of AI violations, and that's academic integrity violations, the other AI, I've heard from hundreds of students and faculty members about their experiences. So in some sense, I have a broad overview of what's happening out there, not just here at UB, but across many other campuses around the world. Sorry, that poll just cut in front. Sorry. Academic integrity professionals have been sort of grappling with these questions for a couple of years now. And we saw some of the very early technology, ChatGPT-2, I think back in 2021. And I can't say we were ready for the new and improved ChatGPT when it came out, but at least we knew it was coming and we knew it would affect the educational industry as a whole. My ethical concerns are based on the assumption that students learn about and understand how to make ethical decisions, which they don't. It's not taught, yet we expect it. We've opened a Pandora's box, if you will, but we've given students very few or no tools at all to figure out how to manage all the options that they have available to them.
Thank you, Loretta. Well said. Rachel, please go ahead.
Hello, everybody. My name is Rachael Kent, and I am currently a career and technical education teacher in Buffalo Public Schools. I teach in a program called the Urban Teacher Academy, so I have the unique pleasure of helping high school students become educators in the future. So not only do I use a lot of AI-inspired technology, but I'm also actively teaching my students about it in a very careful way in the classroom. Outside of my full-time career with Buffalo Schools, I also am an AI integrated curriculum developer for the ed tech company CurePod. So I'm also behind the scenes on some of the tools that teachers are currently using to help develop plans and presentations and curriculum, so I can speak to what it's like behind the scenes. And finally, I was selected as an ASU and GSV Classroom Innovator this year, the first cohort that we're having. So if anybody's heading to San Diego for the air show, I will see you there.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. So again, thank you for joining us. Some of you just came in a little bit late. So what I'm going to do is I have the question here on the screen because as my kids always say, your questions are not just questions. They're like compound questions and they, they kind of meander. So I have my questions here on the screen. I'm going to ask each panelist one question and then there will be some follow-up. And again, please use the chat to add your own 2 cents or to populate with some of your own questions. So my first question is for Greg, and this is related to navigating data privacy, security, and what we call informed consent. So considering the increasing integration of AI tools in K through 12 education, how can educators effectively address the intersecting challenges of data privacy, data security, and informed consent to safeguard students' personal information and ensure ethical use of technology in the classroom? And to follow this point, at this stage, do you feel as though there is an adequate transparency and protection to stakeholders? And again, stakeholders are, you and I, children, teachers, and parents. And what can we do as districts to improve upon this?
We could just turn it all off. No, I'm kidding. Uh, it's a lot to that, right? So I think the first part to consider is that, I mean, yeah, actually, hey, if we turned it all off, we blocked everything, people would still try to get around it. So I think it's never good to just always turn it off. I think it is always effective to have a conversation and to slowly bring people into the ecosystem of the school, the organization. Um, you know, I think one of the things that is happening in the background that maybe some families might not recognize, but I know school districts and higher ed has worked through is Ed Law 2D, which has, I think, done some positive work in trying to secure our personal data information, preventing it from being sold when we give it to a vendor. So they can't take that and then sell it off to somebody else, which would typically occur with our personal accounts, but not when we're operating through a school district. So I do think that is some positive security in the background that now exists that maybe previously didn't. In K-12, we have to have a chief privacy officer now as a role in the district. Those things are all happening in the background to ensure that we are safeguarding student privacy and information and meeting regulatory responsibilities as well. I think in terms of ethics, what are we doing? So after we've allowed the ability to have these accounts to exist, we have agreements with vendors who are using some form of AI. How are we going to teach students, faculty, the community to think ethically about its use? I think already, and in particular in the Buffalo schools that has dealt with data security issues in recent years, I think we have tried to inform more of the public, inform faculty, but I think we still have ways that we need to improve to support students. So while I think it is done at the curricular level, I think when we look at computer science-based standards that have recently come out, and even just dealing with biases that may be taught in ELA or social studies, I think we are still ways away from enforcing it or making students accountable for that type of learning, to have them really go through those experiences, because we're not seeing it as well on those summative assessments at the end of the year as much. So I think it's in the curriculum, it's written there, but we haven't exactly moved to a point where I think students are exemplifying and truly understanding the level of thoughtfulness that should accompany the use of AI tools. Again, kind of going back to things are happening in the background. When we think about our interactions with generative AI, such as Copilot, Microsoft makes it very obvious that they're not saving any data from schools. That is written flatly right there when you log in. I think that ensures that while you're able to have that conversation, our conversations aren't even stored when you use Copilot with an education account. I can't go back to it. It's one and done. You have no idea how frustrating that is for me personally, but when I'm trying to have a conversation. But I think that those safeguards are there for a reason. And the fact that it's not saving any of the information is a bit relieving. But, of course, we're always concerned as citizens, we're giving something to someone. What are they doing with it? How safe is that possibly? And those are things that we can never always 100% guarantee. So how can we improve upon our current use? I think we need to at a state level, we could probably do better to reinforce that the curriculum should feature these types of ethics embedded in. I will say what hasn't been embedded so far is thoughtful, but it hasn't found its way, I think, to enough classrooms at all levels, because these standards are K-12. It's not just, in high school. I have heard teachers say there needs to be a course for this. No, it needs to be in every course. That's the answer to it. It has to find itself in different ways. into different courses. So I think there is some more conversation needs to occur from, I think, faculty to understand that they are also stakeholders and they're also responsible for teaching the ethics of using AI and computers in general. I think students have to take ownership of that learning. And I think the community needs to hear, this is the process for approval of new tools and technology that we give to our students. This is the process. This is what information these vendors receive. I think that could really lower the anxiety that might exist out there. I know there are probably a lot of families out there that probably think that that companies might be selling our data, but that is just not true because we have these signed agreements. They're not allowed to do that. And that's part of Ed Law 2D. That's nothing that the school district's enforcing. It's coming at a state level. So I know you had a loaded question, and I feel like I threw out a lot of different
Oh, no,
things,
but
but
everything was just like a gem putting together. I mean, I love this, your point about finding itself in different ways, right? And the usage and the ethics. And but your point about kind of it's almost like transparency on the district part to parents. This is what we're using, this is AI. And this is why you can be, you can feel secure. I do feel like that component is missing.
actually, if I could also add, I think sometimes because the word AI is used in all these different ways now, I think it just raises that anxiety a bit. I think that AI is in the most simplest of things, like finishing our text messages or our
Mhm.
emails. And I think many people might find that not to be so harmless. They have some control, but it's certainly to generate those things had to have learned from you. So in some of those cases, so you have to consider and maybe provide those examples to show that, not all of it is as exploitive as people might think.
Yes, yes, I totally agree. And I'm going to ask Loretta as a follow-up if you have anything to add.
Sure. So at the higher education level, I think we deal with these issues in two distinct ways, and I agree with a lot of what Greg said. But we have to deal with data about students and data from research as well. So with the advent of artificial intelligence, the privacy of that data is questionable, I think, on both of those levels. We certainly protect student information, as would any responsible institution, but student academic materials are not necessarily always protected. In the past, companies like SafeAssign and Turnitin would capture papers and assignments for the purposes of comparing them to other student assignments. And now with tools like ChatGPT, I'm not confident that those assignments are not then added to a larger database from which future papers might be generated. And in terms of research integrity, data collected is also subject to being used in ways that may not have been intended. If I, for example, run some code through ChatGPT to check for bugs, does that code become part of ChatGPT's knowledge base? If I run a paper through Grammarly to paraphrase it, do both versions end up in some sort of repository of possible language constructions? Or if I ask artificial intelligence to analyze some data, does it keep that information that may be protected by my research protocols, IRB protocols, but not necessarily by the algorithms of ChatGPT or whatever artificial intelligence I'm using? So there are many dangerous avenues that we haven't explored properly, and I think a very high probability for unethical use of information.
Awesome. Thank you, Loretta. Yeah, you're raising some really great points. And we cannot forget that these students go home, right? They go home and they use these tools anyways, even if they're not sanctioned by the school. Maybe they can't use them on their Chromebook, but maybe they're going to use them on my computer, right? To help them. My son has used Grammarly, right? To help with the essay, just kind of restructuring and checking things without a thought to privacy and those higher level issues, which will be staring them in the face when they come into college, and they have more choices and less protection. So thank you for that. I'm going to move to the next question here, which is a question for Rachel. This relates to artificial intelligence and the threat of the loss of autonomy. So there's been concerns about loss of autonomy caused by AI use in the classroom, and it covers many aspects. At the forefront, AI tools may inadvertently diminish students' autonomy by heavily guiding and controlling their learning experiences and decision making. If AI-driven recommendations or assessments are overly prescriptive or restrictive, they may limit students' ability to explore diverse perspectives or engage in independent critical thinking, which is so important. So these are the concerns, and my question relates to how educators can strike a balance between leveraging AI tools to enhance learning outcomes, while at the same time ensuring that these technologies do not inadvertently stifle a student's autonomy. And I think this is a really perfect question for you, of course. And you're on both sides, which I knew, but I didn't know. So you're kind of working in the trenches of the schools, but also have a really strong understanding and experience with the development of these tools.
Yeah, so thank you for this really great question. There's a lot here for sure, and definitely I'll give you a little bit from both of my perspectives. So, I'm a teacher who uses artificial intelligence a lot, but I don't use it for everything. And that's really important. There's a lot of tools out there right now that can do everything, quote unquote, that a teacher does, but not really and not effectively in a lot of the cases. So, when we're talking about striking a balance with leveraging AI tools, we definitely need to have a balance in how often teachers individually rely on tools for the background work of teaching, like planning or preparing lessons, or even giving feedback on student writing, and really be very cognizant of what tools we're introducing students to in the classroom and do it in a very structured way, so that students are building the skills and then they're kind of seeing how artificial intelligence can either reinforce their ideas or push their thinking a little bit further. So I'm going to share a couple examples of some things that I've done in my classroom and some of the programs that I've used that I feel kind of go along with this topic really well. So in Buffalo schools, one of the programs that we use is IXL. So if you're a teacher, a parent, or anyone in between, you've probably heard of that program. And this is an example of one of the modulated kind of artificially intelligent ed tech tools that can help students close the gap in learning. So an IXL system will present different skills that students need to achieve that they've shown to be not up to grade level with on their beginning of the year assessment. And then it gradually paces them through the skills throughout the year to help them hopefully move towards grade level. And overall, we've been experiencing really great growth with the students who are using those tools. But of course, those tools aren't used in isolation. They're used in addition to the in-class instruction, the rigorous conversations, the writing essays. So it's really about having a balance. I would never send a kindergartner home and say, here, use IXL for the next 6 years, and you're going to be reading on level, because you need the human component to help make decisions, check in on the system, see the learning rate, make sure it actually is the child who's using the system and not another user, right? So there's chances and risks for lack of integrity, I guess, not only with artificial intelligence, but when you're using those tools that are really prescriptive and restrictive and give students scores, you also have to worry about and wonder how is that kind of mentally impacting the student as well, because as we noted, it can increase the gaps between students. Maybe IXL works great with learner A and they just keep flying through the skills, where learner B struggles more with the platform and is not really attaining the same level of growth. And that's where that expert knowledge of the teacher needs to come in. There always has to be an expert in the loop before and while students are using artificial intelligence tools. So that's a really big thing that kind of I look for in a tool, knowing that not to my knowledge, Buffalo Public Schools hasn't come out with a broad policy regarding the use of artificial intelligence in the classroom. So it's kind of up to the individual teacher to modulate the risk that you're exposing students to. And we know that if we just let a young person loose on ChatGPT or another platform, they can access all of the information that would certainly violate SEPA laws that we need to keep students away from. Now, of course, any AI tool for teachers or students can be kind of driven off the rails and beyond its protection. And that's why I feel, at least, that teacher oversight during or before use is really important. So for me, striking that balance between using tools to enhance learning outcomes and not stifling their student or teacher's autonomy, there are some really great tools out there that have been developed to support the teaching practice, but not to replace it. So if you're looking for a tool to kind of help with the background tasks of teaching, EduAid is a really great platform that was developed by two teachers who are actually still working in the classroom to this day. And they do a really great job of making sure that their lesson plans are set up according to best practice and that the texts that their system generate are adhering to grade level bands for readability. Which, if you go in and you start using a lot of the big name tech tools that are out there right now, you need to be very, very careful about what is being generated for you and for student use. If you go to ChatGPT, it does not understand grade level. It does not understand it in terms of readability and cognitive demand for vocabulary. So if you go to teacher tool A and you say, give me a passage about American baseball written at the third grade level, you're not really getting the same quality text you're going to get in a leveled book or reader or your textbook. So you really have to stay in the loop as a teacher. These systems are not perfect yet. And yet's a really far ways off before you're going to be able to go to AI, print a passage, and hand it right to your students. There are tools that will help you better differentiate for different groups of students, whether it's students who are above and below skilled levels. There's programs like DIFIT for teachers, also built by teachers, that can take something like an article you find on the internet and it can help to change the Lexile level. But once again, you do want to be really aware that if you're navigating to other sites that are saying it can adjust that Lexile, you'll want to go to something like the Flesch-Kincaid calculator or go to Lexile Analyzer and verify it at least a few times before you're confident in using that system. For presentations, there are some really great tools that will allow students to interact with AI platforms in an anonymous fashion where they are never inputting in their personal information, but you as the teacher in the classroom would know based on the pseudonym that the system assigns. One of those systems I happen to work for is called CurePot. And that system leverages AI in a different way where it actually uses crowd polling and artificial intelligence to create interactive presentations. And the goal isn't to take the focus away from the classroom. All of those interactive presentations are designed to encourage conversations within the classroom. So crowd polling and word clouds and feedback, which do not ask students to put in any personal information at all, but the teacher can see on the back end what students input. And systems like that also include integrated writing feedback, which I know is a really big benefit of the tools that we have right now. The writing feedback that's used through that platform is short form writing. So you are not uploading whole student essays into a system. It is more kind of quick write type activities where the students are getting developmental feedback. Now, I know a big demand on teachers' time is grading. And I would have to say right now, I do not personally have any student material assessment systems that I am using. And that's because I don't feel comfortable with the level of data that is shared and then being uploaded. You never want to enter in any student's personal information into any type of AI system. And all it takes is a name on a paper, right? Or any type of personally identifying information. And you never know, maybe in a couple years, you're going to have everybody's photos going to be able to be attached to everybody's data via artificial intelligence. And we just need to be really careful with that. So personally, in my classroom, I do teach students artificial intelligence directly, but I only do it through school approved platforms. So we use DALL-E image generator, but we use it through Canva, which has its built-in kind of own screening mechanism in the background. We use CurePod, which is the student crowd polling systems where they can receive artificial intelligence feedback, but it doesn't track what they do over long terms. Every single lesson is its own instance, so there's no long-term data storage besides in the teacher's brain of who was on this CurePod and when. So I'm just very leery of this moment of putting too much of my students' information out there. The rate at which artificial intelligence is growing is exponential and way beyond what was predicted. So for me personally, I would say as educators, just take kind of a reserved approach to it. Students are interested, but they're honest. You can ask them. I teach 32 students in my program, and only 2 of them have ChatGPT on their phone. So although it may seem like it's at a crisis level because of what we hear in the news and media, we might not need to be that worried yet in some K-12 situations.
Thank you, Rachel. You had some great points. I especially the having the human be part of the circle. That was kind of something that also came out of that education report, and kind of assessing the chances and risks, that occur. That's on kind of at the teacher's responsibility, which can be challenging. And it did surprise me that you actually said that there's not really a strong policy with respect to AI use within the schools. But it is reassuring to know that you have those kind of secure platforms like Canva. I'm going to turn it over to Greg and ask if you have any additional comments to make.
Yeah, I had a few things. I think Rachel brought up a lot of great points, and the reality of, the direction of AI in a particular school district, like ours in the Buffalo Public Schools. I think if there's a call to action, right now, if you were a student or a teacher on district internet, well, it doesn't matter, on any district device logged in with that account, most generative AI is blocked outright. We have a very strong filtering system at the moment, whereas perhaps a bordering school district is wide open. Erie One BOCES, which provides a variety of services, also does content filtering. So it does send as default filtering across all the districts that it works with, including ours. And then individual districts can have things filtered on top of that. So we have, at the moment, as an observer, not as a decision maker, see, I would say, almost an excessive amount of things blocked. And I feel like there could be a better conversation. We can't, you can't have it on your phone, of course. Those things can exist too. We can't have those things on the phones, but they might still be in the building, right? So they might find themselves on a personal device. Try and use your personal phone in one of these Buffalo schools. I dare you. Those walls are thick. There's no reception coming in. No, but yeah, that is a reality that can happen. But I will say it is limiting though still, because you're not doing it on your device. The pain of copying and pasting even is, between devices can be painful. So I would say that I think that there probably could be a better conversation in terms of how educators should be using it if we could begin to unblock, teach the ethics of it, and begin to move to a future where everyone else is already or on their path already. I feel like by blocking everything, we start to fall behind, which I think is really critical in a district like Buffalo's, which has such a large need due to socioeconomic issues that are prevalent throughout our community. So I feel like by keeping it blocked, we're preventing opportunity as well. And I think we need to start taking a more aggressive approach to opening and teaching ethics so that we can all grow from it and keep up with everyone else. I think I don't want to look at my employer, my school district, as a place where we were 10 years behind on something that was pivotal in our profession. So I think we need to be smart, but also be open. And I think that'll lead to progress. The other thing I want to point out, I think one thing, I feel a little bit calmer, Rachel, than you about generative AI in terms of Copilot in particular, because Copilot, while it is from Microsoft, I know some people probably forgot how to find Bing online, but Copilot is based off of ChatGPT, but it began to work out a lot of the hallucinations that ChatGPT experienced. So Microsoft bought a significant stake in ChatGPT. They pretty much took it, and they've been able to work out some of the hallucinations that were being experienced by ChatGPT. And I think what's beneficial when we're using our education accounts is that it's very firm that it doesn't use any of that information for its own learning. So it doesn't improve upon it when we use it. If I'm logged in with my Buffalo Schools login, it wouldn't allow me to do anything. It wouldn't learn from me. I'd have the conversation, I would get what I need, but it doesn't get anything from me. So that one-way benefit is something that brings me some comfort. And this wasn't just me saying it, I'm just reading the privacy policy. Even at EdTech conferences, when Microsoft is talking, they are bringing that up. They want it known that they are not taking our data on this one. They'll take it from everybody else using their personal accounts or just showing up and using the tool, but not from students on education accounts or teachers on education accounts. That is being removed from it. So you can use it. Now, obviously, common sense should prevail that we shouldn't include personally identifiable information when we're talking to it. But I think there's some benefit there. It at least can start the conversation and how we use generative AI, and at least it brings us to a tomorrow where we're in the future and not a decade behind.
Awesome. Thank you for that comment. I think that this is actually a perfect bridge into the next question because we're talking about, you mentioned you don't want the students to be behind, right? You're already like Buffalo Public Schools already, I feel like is a challenging environment in many ways. And now when they move into the next phase of their life, whether it be in the workplace or in higher education, they could be, right? They could be behind by blocking these tools and resources. So I want to kind of come to Loretta on this because she's our bridge piece, if you will, from University of Buffalo. I want to talk about academic integrity, but I think maybe we can just kind of focus this a little bit also on the bridge between K through 12 and higher education. So as students transition from high school to college, they encounter AI integration in the classroom. This is raising concerns about academic integrity. And in fact, having the experience here at UB, I can tell you firsthand that that's always the theme and the concern of faculty. It relates to academic integrity and preserving the educational process and learning outcomes. So, what academic integrity concerns that you see relate to AI use in the classroom at the undergraduate level? And it could be you see the same things at both level, but I think there's probably something to be said for differences in what you're learning at the graduate level, where you're doing a lot of research, and at the undergrad level, where you're kind of learning foundations. And how crucial is it that K through 12 and higher education collaborate in establishing consistent policies? And what strategies do you suggest for achieving this synergy?
Okay, so I'm so glad you asked this question because it's something we're actually researching right now. The current research, Martine Peters out of the PUP project in Ottawa, Canada, she doesn't necessarily address artificial intelligence specifically, but her research is very geared towards plagiarism specifically. But my gut is telling me that the results would be very similar. Anyways, her research says that there are large gaps in expectations between high school and university. So students expect to enter higher ed and be taught about digital literacy, library and informational skills, writing skills, referencing skills, etc. And these skills not only help students succeed academically, but they also help them avoid academic dishonesty. However, on the other side, faculty members are assuming that students who enter university already have these skills and are therefore ready to learn content. When students mess up a citation or they don't really evaluate a source properly, suddenly they end up with this academic integrity violation that they really don't understand. So there's this expectation gap. Students are assumed to know how to use artificial intelligence appropriately, but faculty assume they already know the policies surrounding its use, and they don't. So I have a couple of suggestions. My suggestions are: one, create a realistic policy for your environment, both at the high school and at the university level. Make it understandable and very available, transparent to all stakeholders. We often ask students about the differences between their high school experience and university experience. And what we hear in terms of academic integrity is that it's taken more seriously and is punished more severely at the university level. That's pretty common. So no matter what policy a high school adopts, I think it should acknowledge that the fair use of artificial intelligence is context specific, and that expectations about its fair use will increase with educational level. I also think that artificial intelligence is still relatively new, obviously, and the technology is improving daily. So it's very difficult to establish consistent policies between high schools and universities. Also, different organizational structures between high school and universities call for different policies. So high schools tend to have more prescribed classroom rules, while at the university level, most of the classroom policies are dictated by the individual professors themselves due to academic and freedom. So I think consistency is going to be very, very difficult to achieve. The second thing I would suggest is educate, educate, educate. Get out there, share the policy, share the consequences, talk about ethical decision-making, talk about assessment. This is for faculty, staff, and students, for everyone involved. Faculty and staff, get them together, talk about learning objectives. Do their current assessments still match their objectives? Are there other ways to get to that objective that might decrease the opportunity for the use of artificial intelligence? If artificial intelligence is used, do they know ways to detect it? Do they have policies to follow if they do detect something suspicious? Are they using these situations as teachable moments or punishable moments? And then for students, all students should have some sense of what artificial intelligence is, how it might be used, the good things about it, the things to watch for. So when engaging with students, I want to help them make some critical decisions about its use. So sometimes when I speak with them, these are some of the things I talk about. I tell them some of the issues that we're seeing. It's often inaccurate. It doesn't always directly answer a question. And the level of writing is pretty shallow. By helping them critically examine its faults, it may make them reconsider how or even if they want to use it. And I also emphasize learning over grades. The outcome of education is the process, not the product. And too often students are stressing over the grade, and that's what ultimately leads them to an academic integrity violation. We really need to stress the process. Artificial intelligence can only give us the output. It can't think for us. I also stress to them that ChatGPT, Grammarly, Google Translate, all those things are just tools. They can't do the work for us. They can help us get to a better place. And new tools will always be developed, but they always need to be evaluated critically. So how can we use these tools to make us better, but still be essentially ourselves? And I always ask students to think about the use of artificial intelligence from the teacher's standpoint. If they're expected to give you a grade, how will they be able to assess what you're doing? Is it accurate? Are faculty assessing you, or are they assessing what the computer knows? Without accurate assessment, your grades become meaningless. Diplomas become meaningless. The whole academic enterprise crumbles. And when we share this idea about assessment with students, making them imagine the role of the teacher, they seem to understand it a little bit better. Usually they want their diploma to mean something that they can be proud of. And then the last thing I would say is we need to listen. We need to pay attention to faculty feedback, and we need to hear student voices because they're out there using this artificial intelligence and facing it every day. The more we listen, the more synergy we create between institutions, between people. That's important because ultimately those connections are way more important than anything artificial intelligence has to offer. That's it.
Thank you so much, Loretta, for that perspective. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to skip right over to Rachael and ask if she has anything to add, but also Carly, if you can put up the last poll while Rachael is talking, and then we can get to the Q&A. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Loretta. That was a lot to think about. I really appreciated your contribution. I do agree there is a really big gap between what we're able to do in high school and what students are expected to know and know how to critically think in college. I definitely think most high school students are still struggling with getting back into in-person learning again. I think we did a lot of damage to student motivation during the pandemic, and young people also learned a lot about mental health and self-care to a greater extent, and heard a lot about work-life balance. So, keeping their time for themselves is oftentimes a big impetus for young people to want to use a shortcut, right? How am I going to engage in other pleasurable activities if I have to write your essay? But we need them to get those skills because as they're getting through high school, we need them to pass their Regents exams. They need to be able to write their research papers and come across intelligently in their workplace as well. So I think that there's lessons that students can be taught along the way with the use of artificial intelligence as they progress through writing essays as a freshman, asking them to use an artificial intelligence source as a part of a research paper and teaching them how to use it to kind of inform research practices. But here, especially in our area and especially in high schools now with the American Rescue Plan funds being cut, we're looking at a lot of cuts again with high school teachers and cuts to programs at a time when doing something like adding in a CTE program to help artificial intelligence skills grow would really rocket our schools and our students into the stratosphere in college and careers. So I definitely think schools need to take a hard look at what programs are going to integrate well with artificial intelligence. Can we require every student to take an artificial intelligence and research class, which would help them develop work and college skills? Thinking really creatively how we can integrate that to support what they need to know to be successful in college.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. Um, so I think that, I thought 3 questions wouldn't be enough. 3 questions was more than enough. We got some great input from this diverse panel. I'd like to thank you guys again for participating. And what's coming through on these polls is sending an overwhelming message. I think that there needs to be additional training and resources to teachers. And I would say also information and transparency to parents, and also training of students. So I feel like we have a lot of work to do, and this is a great group to start those discussions. What I'd like to do now, we're already kind of at time, but I would like to open the floor for questions. Carly, I'm going to leave it to you to call on people that have requested.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know, oh, there we go. I know that Ilya Shamarati had a question. I don't know if they've sent it yet in the chat or if they wanted to unmute. We'll give that a sec.
Yeah, if you'd like
Have my
to,
voice.
yeah.
Well, I had some considerations about the, risks that AI can have in many aspects. For example, I've seen people that use AIs like ChatGPT to write their lectures or let's say cheating, you know what I'm saying? And I want to ask that, how do you think we can um, ensure that students cannot use AI for cheating or doing their assignments?
That's a great question. I think, I think everybody's touched on that a little bit. So I'm going to leave it to the panel if anybody would like to chime in.
So at UB, we have faculty regularly run kind of suspicious papers or assignments through Turnitin, which is available to all faculty at UB. I'm not sure what's available at the K-12 level, but we also tell them that that is only one piece of evidence. They really need to assess the report and they need to speak with the student. So sometimes when you speak to the student, it becomes evident that they really know the material or they don't know the material. So you really need to kind of just have a verbal conversation with them so that you can assess what they actually know. And as I said, those reports are good, but they're only one piece of the puzzle.
But I want to add that, I mean, they can just read the papers, those things that AI has generated and, know what to answer. Or, I know you're definitely correct. When you speak to a student, you can definitely understand that his or her level is, which level they are in. And another question, I'm from Iran. I don't know, do you know Iran? I think you say Iran, but we call it just Iran. Um, our schools are using like old school technologies. I've never used AI at school. We just have whiteboards and normal technologies like old school, like 50 years ago or something. I would definitely would like to know more about your education system and how do you use AI, in which aspects you use AI in teaching. Um, and well, I was really happy to see that you're having this meeting about like the ethical implications of AI in education, but I'm more worried about um, risks that AI can have for us in every aspects. For example, I've heard that in future, probably AI would take over some people's work, jobs, and AI is so smart. It just has access to like every knowledge on the internet, as much as I know. And I'm really worried. I would like to, I'm looking for studying computer science. at university, and AI these days can like write codes for computers and do lots of stunning things that I think, people would just leave it to AI to do the work in the future. So what do you think about that?
Can I take a step back at your previous question? I just wanted to add one thing. I think with the concerns of how teachers might set up assessments and concerns about Turnitin and using tools like that in order to support teachers in evaluating how generative AI might be used. I think it also comes back to, I think the core thing that I've learned in my journey through generative AI is that the future is about asking the right questions. It's not always about the answer coming out. And I think if we don't structure questions well enough, the answers will never be sufficient. And I think that really helps when you're a teacher and you're considering an assessment, because even if you are thinking that maybe your students might use generative AI, how are you structuring your questions, your rubric, so that it is so far complex that it is capable for your students, but not for generative AI to just churn it out in a few minutes. And I think often, I mean, what I didn't mention at the beginning of this too is I also have worked as an adjunct. So I kind of feel both sides of it a little bit at times, of the demands and what comes up in the course of a semester. And I think I kind of come back to, if we aren't asking the right questions and the complex questions that are scaffolded, I don't think we're going to get generative AI to produce those results that we need. In a case in point, I was doing this thing related to a grant right now. I'm doing some initial writing about it. And I was thinking, some of my initial questions, I was seeking generative AI. I had questions, but I realized the answers it was giving me weren't the best. Even though I gave it my goal, what I needed, the answers weren't adequate enough. And I realized that I wasn't asking it the right questions. And I needed to ask a subset of questions. Without having known that, you're not going to get the right product that you need or want, and you won't do well, period. To kind of go into your next part about tools, I think our use of like a logarithmic AI is everywhere. I think some of the design-based AI is something that has made our use of certain technologies better. I mean, I think people's presentations have gotten better in the past 2 years, thanks to AI. I'll just put it out there. No offense to people, but the hours making size 12 font presentations, sorry, I'm happy those are gone. I think what our concern mostly is the generative AI and where that is headed in classes. And I know, I'm guessing, yes, maybe Rachel probably has something to say more so about that. But I mean, but I do think there are a host of tools out there that can support students. I just think at the bare minimum, being able to inform our design or how we're thinking in our organization, I think that will greatly improve how we are trying to express ourselves and support what we know, and for any particular product that we're writing at the academic level.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gregory. In the name of preserving time, I see Brenda's hand is raised, and I want to make sure we get to that. And then there's one more question in the chat I want to make sure that we address.
Hi, Buffalo Public School teacher here, and really awesome presentation. I teach ENL to 7th and 8th graders, and they talk about using AI, ChatGPT, and other things for their writing assignments. And I've heard my students expressing like, well, why do I need to learn how to write? Because the future is AI, and these programs can write it for me. And I'm just trying to come up with a good rebuttal to that, to make sure that I'm helping my students who will, be the writers of the future, to be invested in learning these necessary skills, even with AI.
I definitely think that is a really great question and a really difficult thing to convince a young person who is dead set on going the easy route to take the not so easy route. I think that students really need to see that there can be an implication on how much money you will earn in your future with career skills. That's always a great convincing point with middle schoolers, I feel, and high schoolers as well, is AI isn't going to negotiate your salary contract for you. Like, you still need to be able to speak well, argue for yourself, present evidence, that being a good writer isn't just about writing. You need to know how thoughts are organized to be a good speaker too. And if your brain doesn't have good organization with your thoughts, when they implant that chip in there, your AI isn't going to help you anyway, right? So I think just kind of making it real world, and you know, find a couple clips from AI gone wrong movies that are school appropriate and show them some of those. We watched some clips from Ready Player One a couple weeks ago in my class. I wouldn't recommend the whole thing, but there's some good chunks about that AI dystopia. So just kind of reminding them that, like, just like, PS4 is now out the window, we have PS5 in here. You don't know what's going to happen with artificial intelligence in the next round. So you have to have those skills to be able to articulate, speak for yourself, negotiate that higher salary, or probably for most middle schoolers, that, Major League Baseball contract, right?
Awesome, thank you. Well, the question that I saw in the chat, Rachel Kent, you actually responded to. So if we don't have anything else, in the name of time, I think we can wrap up. Thank you all so much for being here today. This was a fantastic session. For folks in the audience, or our presenters, if you have any questions, feel free to send them to me. I'll put my email in the chat. I'd love to see you at future AI sessions. So that's ed.buffalo.edu/AI-ed. I'll put that in the chat as well. And thanks so much for your time, all.
Thank you so much, Carly. Thank you so much, Greg, Rachel, and Loretta. I think it was a terrific discussion, and all of you for joining today. Thank you.